This is Mixture, a fantasy adventure where you must aid and control an exiled knight in third-person platformer action, while also playing as Sephiroth, an ancient being with alchemical powers in first person, very much akin to classic VR gems like the Moss series or Astrobot Rescue Mission. This released February 23rd, 2023 for the Quest 2 and Pro headsets for $25 US, and for this review, we checked it out on the Quest 2. Is Mixture the next amazing VR platformer, or do missteps hold it back from greatness? Let's find out. Hey VR lovers, this is Ryan from the VR Grid, and before we get to it, if you think we are worthy, we'd love for you to like this vid, subscribe to this channel, and if you enjoy talking all about VR, why not join us live every Thursday night at 9 PM Eastern Time for the Virtual Boys podcast, right here on this channel. Now, let's get to it. After being discovered by the tiny knight Sola, you awaken to discover that your corporeal form is no more, and you exist only as an apparition of your former self, tied to a medallion worn by Sola. While you as Sephiroth have no physical form, you still retain some of your alchemical abilities that allow you to create potions using nearby minerals as their ingredients. It's with these potions and Sola's abilities that the two of you must form an uneasy alliance in order to stop the other alchemists from reaching the Gateway of Light and plunging this world into chaos under their rule. An opening tutorial teaches you the basics of alchemy, which lets you absorb nearby minerals and use a potion wheel to summon the correct concoctions for your needs and toss them at your targets. You can choose to throw without aid or turn on aim assist, which highlights the target you are looking at, making for a much easier time, with the latter being my preferred way to play as the difficulty here can still be quite high. Once you familiarize yourself with your abilities, the game begins with the first stage acting as the second tutorial for Solo's controls and learning how to chain together your combined abilities. Solo plays in traditional third-person action platformer style and has the ability to strike, dash, glide, and climb, though it is worth noting that she can't jump on her own. Solo's combat is relegated largely to mashing a face button and dodging attacks using the dash ability, though upgrades do change up the system a little. While games like Moss and Ven had you pairing your abilities with your tiny counterparts every now and then, in Mixture, every puzzle and encounter will require you to work together, making for some hectic and rewarding battles. You'll encounter a few stray foes as you traverse the various biomes, but it's when the magical walls pop up to block your progress that you'll be in for a bigger battle. Enemies come in very distinct forms, from ones that fly and try to blast you from afar, while smaller balls try to roll after you, larger stone golems may launch their heads your way, or little floating bastards will give all these enemies shields and need to be taken out first. A bunch more enemy types pop up, further mixing up the combat, as each will be vulnerable to one or more of your alchemical abilities. These include a sticky potion which will lock enemies in place or knock them out of the sky, a hardening potion that allows you to knock back enemies or disable their abilities, and while those two powers will be used to dispatch a bulk of the bad guys, the other powers you unlock throughout the 8 to 10 hour campaign will also be needed against the much larger bosses. It's in those battles where all your skills are put to the test, and you'll have to avoid unique and powerful attacks while puzzling out each one's weaknesses. The encounters here are very satisfying, and while Solo's combat options are a little basic, in combination with your own abilities, make for some engaging battles as the need to balance all the elements at play is a must. When not dealing out damage, Solo will have to scale this massive world, utilizing and chaining together every single power and ability in your arsenal. Certain plants become very bouncy when hit with that hardness potion. Some platforms may need to be held together so Solo can walk on them using the sticky potion, while redstones and areas covered in rust must be temporarily dispelled by other chemicals. Factor in the need to dash across gaps, glide to lower areas, scale others while manipulating switches that moveset platforms and unblock your path, and things can get very tricky very fast. In the latter half of the game, you'll encounter energy barriers that block your magical powers while letting Solo pass through them, and chaining together the right potion while navigating through these areas can be very challenging. Thankfully, the game does a great job at introducing each new mechanic one at a time, so even though the latter half of the game offers up substantial difficulty, obstacles never feel unfair, minus one notable issue. You act as the camera, and while you can turn around to change your angle or use the snap turn option, on more than a few occasions, I found myself in an awkward position, causing me to bend my neck in some uncomfortable ways so I could view the action, or move around in the real world, but as I played this seated, the latter choice wasn't exactly ideal. It doesn't happen often, and when it does it's never game-breaking, it just hampers the fun a bit. During the campaign, you'll also need to collect golden flowers hidden in vases scattered throughout each biome, and once you've collected enough of them, you can purchase new attacks or armor for Sola, which will help ease the burden on some of those more hectic encounters. A few more alchemical powers also pop up, 6 in total, that offer even more unique interactions, giving Mixture a ton of depth and replay value, as eventually, you unlock the ability to revisit any world to hunt down those missed collectibles. Counter to that very in-depth gameplay is a visual style that looks lacking compared to the other titles I've mentioned so far, but does offer a unique art style nonetheless, and some massive stages with impressive verticality and draw distance. Don't get me wrong, Mixture doesn't look bad by any stretch, it can just look lacking at times thanks to some relatively flat areas and simple textures. Everything in here looks as if it were painted with pastels, but typically uses darker colors, making much of this world feel drab and uninviting. But given that the world is falling under some pretty dark times, this makes sense, and there are moments that are rife with color, so it's not all dark and bleak. Sola and her brethren are all very tiny creatures with armor styled after individual animal. Sola is a moth, and they are all quite small, so as you travel through the realm, you'll be walking through grass and smaller plants that tower over you, though this use of scale is somewhat underutilized, as much of the world has been scaled to your size, making most of the game look like just another new area, which isn't necessarily a bad thing either. There are 4 different larger biomes to explore, and they are massive, with each offering various environmental challenges to navigate, like having to dash across lily pads, climbing up and down the insides of massive statues, or even surfing down some rocky half-pipes to get to the depths of some larger caverns. It's each biome's unique assets that do set this apart from others, as each feels quite different, and from beginning to end, despite some of its shortcomings, I enjoyed every new set piece I stumbled across and the variety they came in. Accompanying that epic story is a soundtrack that is used to emphasize each scene and encounter, falling into the background and adding subtle emotion as opposed to being overpowering. That epic story is a little underwhelming as the entirety of the game is explained through dialogue, but unfortunately, all that dialogue appears in blocks of text you'll have to read, and at times, it felt like a lot. When each character is talking, they will audibly utter some gibberish, but given just how much story is at play, I think it would have gone a long way to have fully voiced characters or a narrator to help hammer home the weight of this tale. Regardless, once I did start to piece together what was happening, I was invested in seeing how this was all going to play out. Sound effects are all on point, with the various sounds of battle and all the individual elements at play making appropriate noises, and while I didn't really notice any positional audio at play, seeing as how the action occurs largely in front of you, this is less of an issue than in more traditional VR first-person titles. It took a little while for Mixture to grab me, but once it did, I couldn't stop playing. A new element or enemy type was introduced to keep me on my toes. Factor in that each new power can be used in a variety of ways in and out of combat, and this platformer might just be the most in-depth one I've ever played. The presentation does suffer a little, but is made up for by the larger scale of the game and with the rather lengthy 8+ hour campaign, plus some replayability in that item hunting, and you get an action platformer that feels familiar, yet offers up something entirely new, and all of that for a modest price, and a game I highly recommend for fans of the genre. I'm going to give Mixture an 8 out of 10. This was a nice surprise. If you enjoyed this vid, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and if you have something to say about this video, leave a comment below. That's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching.